Hi, my name is David Craiglow, and this is my art history podcast interview project. I'll be discussing visual arts with John Aasp. My original interviewee was unable to complete his portion due to an emergency. However, even in art, some setbacks can end up being springboards to much more significant material. My fallback subject for the interview ended up being John Aasp. He is an artist from South Texas. He is also the curator and visual arts director for the Rockport Center for the Arts in Rockport, Texas. His personal portfolio is quite fascinating, and I will show some of his pieces throughout the presentation, along with works from some of the artists he mentions in the interview. We were unable to record the interview due to timing constraints, so I will be repeating the words that he typed in his response. The first question I asked John was, what do you see as the role of visual arts in our mass-mediated world, and particularly in your profession? John's response was, I see the role of visual arts as more important than ever. Images and messages are bombarding us all the time, and rather than letting them sink into our unconscious and leaving it to taste and personal opinion, we should try to appreciate both the history and current trends in the visual arts to help enlighten and decipher a lot of these messages. Studying the history of art tells us a lot about history itself, and studying contemporary art can tell us a lot about contemporary culture. In my profession, there is a tense balance between art as a hobby and art as a profession, but I think there is room for both. I continued with question number 2. With new communications and media technologies, imagery is almost instantly available. Do you believe that this is having a positive or negative influence on the industry? And could you provide me with an example? He continued with his answer. It's a good thing for creativity that imagery is available everywhere. It helps the conversation grow and flourish among free societies. However, there are issues of copyright and intellectual property that can get tricky. It also makes it more challenging to understand the context of all the images we see on a daily basis. Overall, I would rather have more than less. The tricky thing is to learn to be a smart filter of that information and not waste time on consuming media that isn't worth it. As to copyright, the Creative Commons license is a good example of how artists are dealing with copyright issues in their work, and I think it's a great way to approach that problem. My third question was, what popular images do you see that are frequently rechanneled throughout the entertainment industry? His reply was, there are so many. Remediation is a key aspect of the contemporary media culture. Think of all the Hollywood films that are remakes of earlier films. That's a blatant example. Or when someone thinks the Mona Lisa is a good representation for art as a whole. But a more pertinent examination of rechanneling images was the master of pop, Andy Warhol. He examined consumer culture, mass production, celebrity, and originality, and that was half a century ago. There are countless artists that have come after that rechannel images and ideas from the past. But I would say generally, and to name only a few, America continues to rechannel Marilyn Monroe, Hitler, and JFK. I think the reason for this is our obsession with sexuality, violence, and hope that are connected to moments of trauma in our history. You see this being rehashed over and over again on many different levels, but I think you could find examples of all sorts of images and ideas that are retold throughout the entertainment industry. My fourth question went on to ask, are there particular images that the industry has popularized and or created? His answer was, if you are speaking of a general industry such as Hollywood, then yes. Hollywood always perpetuates certain narratives. The singular hero, for instance. One has to keep in mind that the media industry markets to mostly basic instinctual reactions. which is why you always hear from them the term sex sells, and from TV news, if it bleeds, it leads. The entertainment industry is largely superficial and formulaic. If you're talking about the visual arts industry, I think it has more complexity. I find the visual arts to be rich and detailed and tied to specific or personal stories, abstract ideas, and historical cultural reference in addition to design. The visual arts are really a language much like music. I find myself never guessing too much about the plot of any given Hollywood film, but I am never bored by the visual arts, which can include film, by the way. Now, I might add here that John works very closely with the Rockport Film Festival, so he speaks with some credentials. My fifth question went on to ask, who is your favorite visual artist or artists, and what is your favorite style of visual art? An Italian artist whose work has a strong visual impact, but also has a cleverness and a bit of mischief. There are many more, Richard Prince, Charles Ray, and Sarah Say, Peter Beard, several others. I don't necessarily have a favorite style, but I particularly enjoy installation, video art, and photography. My sixth and final question for John went as follows. How has your knowledge of famous artworks influenced your creative process? He responded quite logically with, I don't think one can truly start to understand contemporary art without having studied famous artworks throughout history. They teach us about technical mastery, yes, but they also teach us about how those artists viewed the world they lived in. It's easy to appreciate a pretty painting and the technical skill to make it look a certain way. But how does one appreciate Picasso or Duchamp, Warhol, or Catalan? I think just like physics or architecture, the study of visual arts can be complex and even contradictory, but one does have to study it to become proficient in the language of art and the language of creativity. The more works of art and periods within art one can recall, the more informed one becomes when they see it referenced in today's context, and the stronger your media filter becomes. Some call this visual literacy, and I think it will continue to increase in importance as the world grows more and more diverse and cross-cultural, becoming even more important than originality. My own creative process has certainly benefited from it.